You're listening to Together by AGCI. I'm Melissa Rush. Today we're talking about the incredibly important topic of chronological age versus developmental age with Jill Cruz, AGCI's Director of U.S. Child Advocacy Services. This episode is a must listen for parents, caregivers, and anyone who works with children from hard places. Let's get into our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to learn more about developmental age and chronological age, and just so thankful that you're willing to share your wisdom with us today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So can you start by just defining developmental age and chronological age?
Yeah. So when we're thinking about chronological age, we're really thinking about how long has it been since you were born, right? How old are you? Are you 12? Are you 15? Are you 47? Are you 83? And that's basically it. There are some developmental components that are connected to the chronological age that you are. In other words, there's ages at which certain changes happen in your brain, which are tied to your chronological age. But for the most part, where you are in your development is really a reflection of your capacity to meet different developmental milestones in different domains. And that's reflected in congruence with your chronological age. So are you doing the same things your peers are doing? Do you have the capacity to do different things at different times based on your chronological age? But the two things really are different.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it. So can you kind of just go into what are some reasons why a child's developmental age might be different from their chronological age?
Yeah. So if we come into the world and we start having experiences, right? Immediately. In fact, we have lots of experiences before we come into the world. When we're in utero. And those experiences, whether it's in utero or post-birth and throughout our lives, impact the way our brains develop, the way our bodies develop. It impacts our belief systems, our capacity for self-regulation, and just so many things that are part of our life experience. So when we have histories of stressful experiences, either, again, in utero, and I'm highlighting that because I think sometimes people don't realize that that's a very important piece of our time frame in terms of all kinds of development. But that history is going to impact what happens for us developmentally. So if we think about it as there's something that we refer to in trust-based relational intervention as the 5 Bs. So that starts with the brain. So that's our brain development, that's our neurochemistry, and then we have the body. So what's happening physiologically? How are our bodies developing physically? What is our capacity around sensory integration and things like that? And then we have biology, which is what components of our DNA are going to be manifested based on our experiences. And that's a really interesting one. And it's not just what's going to be manifested, but how is it going to be manifested? And that's it. I don't want to get too complicated, but essentially our experiences and what we're exposed to and whether we have trauma or stress or not is going to impact what kind of comes out of our DNA as we grow. And then we have our beliefs, our experiences within relationships and in different environments. It creates kind of a blueprinting or a wiring in our brains for what do we believe about the world? How do we understand relationships work? Do we have the capacity to trust? And if so, what does that look like for us? What do we require in order to trust somebody? or to trust a system or to trust an experience, right? That we're going to be safe. It's also what we believe about ourselves.
Yeah.
Are we worth it? Do we matter? And it's also like, do we have a voice? Or do we have safe people in our lives who are going to listen to our voice? If we use our voice to communicate that we have a need, is somebody going to actually respond to that in a safe, healthy, emotionally responsive way or not? And so our beliefs are going to be impacted also by our experience. And then the last one, which is the one that I think is easiest to recognize, especially if it's not going well, is our behaviors. Behavior is like an external way to communicate about our experience and about our needs, particularly when we don't have a different way to communicate that. So a lot of times for our kids who have experienced histories of trauma and stressful experiences in their lives, they are driven by survival in a lot of ways, in a lot of different situations. So all of those 5 Bs, the brain, the body, the biology, the beliefs, and the behavior, are impacted by our in utero experiences as well as our post-birth experiences. And that can have a really, really big impact on what happens for us in terms of being able to meet different developmental milestones in different domains along the way. The other thing is attachment. What does our attachment experience look like? What has it been like for me in having my primary caregiver or caregivers meet my needs, especially in the first 3 years of life, but throughout my whole life? Like, it kind of goes back to those beliefs about relationships, right? How do I do that? Can I trust? Do I matter? Do I have a voice? And relationships and the way that we're cared for by our primary caregivers is also the way that we learn the tools of self-regulation. We don't come into the world knowing, like, if I get upset, this is what I do to calm down, right? We don't know that. And the way that we learn that, hopefully from the very beginning, is by a series of experiences that we have with our caregiver that teaches our brains and our bodies how to calm down, right? We learn that, like, rocking, swaying back and forth is calming if that was done for us, right? Or a deep hug is comforting if that was done for us, right? We learn it along the way through that attachment cycle. And we learn, does anyone have me? Like, we all need, like, as humans, I need people in my life that have me no matter what. They have me, right? And then we also learn those healthy relational skills. Can I give care to somebody else? Can I receive care from somebody else without feeling guilty, right? Can I negotiate my needs? Can I say what it is that I need? Can I use my voice? And am I okay being autonomous? Am I okay in different situations, whether I'm alone or I'm with other people? So all of those things are going to influence what happens developmentally for us and what skills we have, which then also will impact the behaviors that we have in response to expectations that other people have of us based on how old we are. Chronologically.
So are those things, so say if you're a child and you don't get some of that, attachment and kind of the things you're describing that we all need, is there like a going back and kind of recovering some of that, or how does that work?
Absolutely. And that's the good news. And I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think, when you first learning about this, I remember, when I was first learning about all of this, it felt really heavy and daunting and like, oh my gosh, I'm an adoptive mama. And my son had a very stressful in utero experience and trauma connected to that. And so when I learned about this, I was like, wow, like, is there any opportunity, right? Because what we want to do is we want to help our kids heal. And so the good news is that we can absolutely have a healthy, positive healing impact on all of those 5 Bs through giving our kids, nurturing, connected, healthy experiences. And in a lot of ways, going back and giving them what they may not have gotten before they came to us. And that looks different depending on the chronological age of the child. For example, I at one point in my career, I did a lot of work in the field of child protection. And one of the foster families that I was working with, who was caring for a sibling set, they were younger, but the older child was about 4 or 5 years old. And that child really didn't have a voice, didn't ask for anything, like wouldn't communicate, hey, I'm hungry, wouldn't express any needs verbally. And the thing that was even more challenging about it, believe it or not, was that there weren't a lot of big behaviors. That child just kind of went internally and kind of withdrew. And so it's easy to just assume, oh, this child's just fine. They're easy. They don't have any needs, but that wasn't the case. Right. And so we really worked on giving language and being really purposeful about going back and anticipating needs before they arise, they arose for that child. And then meeting that need on purpose and then verbalizing what we were doing and why. So the example was like, they wake up in the morning, oh, good morning. So good, hugs, however that morning routine goes, but like, you must be hungry. You've been sleeping all day. So I'm going to feed you breakfast and, just giving the words. And then, 10 a.m. rolls around. Wow, it's been a couple hours since you ate. You must be hungry. How about a snack? And so on and so forth. And within a pretty short period of time, that child gained voice and confidence and the capacity to say, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. And it seems like such a basic thing, but that's just one example of how you can go back and kind of redo or recreate the situation or the experience that child didn't get. And with teenagers, you can do something around that same thing. So with food, right? I have a good, friend and colleague who, she was fostering teenagers, and they had the oldest was very parentified and was kind of often put in charge of caring for her younger siblings and just didn't really have a lot of this experience of being cared for herself. And so one of the things that this mom did was said, I know this is crazy. I know you're totally capable of preparing your own snacks and getting what you need. You've been doing it for a really long time and you've been doing it for your siblings, but just humor me. Will you let me get you some stuff? Will you let me make you your snack when you come home from school? And this teenage girl who was, I think she was probably 16 or 17 was like, what? but she went with it. She went with it. And, she's like, okay. Right. And so this mom's like, great. What do you want for snack? And she's like, oh, I don't know. A piece of cheese, she's just something, simple. And she's like, great. Why don't you sit down and I'm going to go get it for you. Do you want me to go ahead and open it? And this girl's like, what the heck is going on? But she's like, don't worry. Just humor me. Just humor me. She's like, okay. So she's like, yeah, open it. So she brings her the string cheese already opened and hands it to her. And there was probably a few days of awkwardness around that. But then I think there was this connected experience of it's okay for me to be cared for. And this is what I didn't get. And you know what? I really need it. So within a few days, this teenager started to come home from school already knowing what she wanted. And she was asking for snacks that you would normally make for younger kids, like ants on a log and, sliced apples or a hot dog, but sliced up into pieces and stuff like that. And so it was just really healing. So that's just one example with different age ranges of what that might look like.
Wow. That's so encouraging. Thank you for sharing that. And it just kind of shows we all need that to be cared for and to feel, like you said, someone has you. And it doesn't matter how old you are, that's just like a fundamental human experience that we need. And that if you unfortunately miss out on that as a younger child, like there's still ways to find healing in that, which is so cool.
Yeah. It just one other thing to add about that, which I think, it goes for adults too. There was a woman who didn't feel like her needs were met, especially around food growing up. And as an adult, her refrigerator broke. And her parents, like they had healed their relationship, but her parents bought her a new refrigerator.
Wow.
And that, again, doesn't seem like a simple thing, but it was such a deep expression of repair, even in her adult life.
Yeah. Well, because I think, it's like, and I know today, I mean, we're focused, on mostly talking about children, but it's not like you turn 18 and it all is just stops and is, this is who you are. This is how it is. You don't need to, work on yourself or heal or anything. It's like, it's a lifelong thing. And we all have things we can, continue to find healing from. And I thank you for sharing that, because it's like, it's not done just because you're older. It's never done.
Yeah.
So kind of circling back to just the basics, can you just share, how is developmental age measured on just kind of a basic level?
Yeah, for sure. So our developmental age is really based on what is our capacity to achieve or meet different developmental milestones based on what our chronological age is and what's typical for that age. Okay. So it's very heavy. Our capacity to meet those, milestones, I guess is a good way to say it, is really heavily influenced by our current situation, our level of self-regulation, our attachment experiences, and our history, like I talked about before. When we're measuring developmental age, a lot of times most parents experience this with their children when they're very young or when they first come to them and they go to the doctor for a well check. And the doctor's ask, there's questionnaires sometimes that you fill out and it's based on their chronological age. Like, are they walking? Are they talking? Are they, it's more in depth than that. And then when they're older, the questions are a little different. But most parents are exposed to that kind of evaluation. But oftentimes what ends up happening is that we start to realize that maybe there may be some delays or some differences in our kids' development when they go into situations with close in age peers and their behavioral, emotional, social, cognitive responses aren't matching up with what their peers are reflecting in all of those areas as well. And then we start to kind of ask questions about that.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that, because I think sometimes those things get conflated. People just talk about your your chronological age as if that is just all that it is. And it's obviously, that's not true. There's a lot, it's a lot more complicated than that. So you've talked about the B's, and I would assume that this is related to that, but do children who have experienced trauma often have a developmental age that's different from their chronological age?
Yes. Very, very common. I would say in the years that I've been in this field of working with kids and families who have experienced trauma, I would be hard pressed to find even more than a handful of situations where there's not at least one developmental domain that's impacted. And that's specifically because of what I was talking about before with those 5 B's and the attachment cycle and, how our experiences impact that. And again, it's not that we can't help a child get back on track developmentally and that we can't. I mean, we definitely can. And there's lots of tools to do that. And TBRI offers a lot of those tools.
Yeah.
The other thing that I was going to say is that research shows that kids who have a history of trauma are typically developmentally less than half their chronological age in a lot of developmental areas. Mm-hmm. So if I have a 16-year-old, mm-hmm. then there could be, I don't want to say probably, but there could be, mm-hmm. and there, areas where they're functioning more like an 8-year-old, mm-hmm. right? Or, there might be areas where they're maybe slightly delayed, mm-hmm. or even more delayed. One of the things that, we see a lot of times is that our kids may be, let me just give you an example. Yeah. So let's say you have a 12-year-old. Mm-hmm. Okay. 12-year-old comes to you, physically, maybe they're a little small in stature, a little small for their age. If they were, they didn't get the right nutrition or mm-hmm. medical care, or maybe they had some premature birth or different things that happened from their birth and in utero experience. So they're physically maybe about more like an 11-year-old.
Okay.
And then their social skills, mm-hmm. And their emotional skills may be way younger, right? If they had experienced trauma, especially relationally based trauma, like emotionally, they might be more like a 3-year-old because they don't know how to manage their emotions in a developmentally, quote unquote, appropriate way. Mm-hmm. Socially, they may not have the social skills to engage with peers. So socially, they might be 4 or 5, right? And then their brain development and their cognitive capacity, they could be like an 8 or 9-year-old. And then obviously that would impact what's happening academically and educationally. But at the same time, they might have, and a lot of our kids do, the life experience that a lot of adults don't ever have in their entire lifetime. Mm-hmm. So you have kids who are trying to manage these experiences while at the same time not having the developmental capacity or skills emotionally, socially, cognitively, self-regulation wise to be able to navigate those things successfully.
Yeah. I'm so glad
that's very common.
I'm so glad you went into that because I think it's so important for caregivers, anyone interacting with children, to have an understanding of that, because otherwise you're kind of just setting everyone up to be frustrated, right? Like if you have these expectations that there's no way, they're completely unrealistic, right? And that it's going to have the child be frustrated, the adult be frustrated. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's what ends up a lot of times resulting from that is just a lot of shame for the child. Like kind of beating themselves up for like, well, I should be able to do this. Why can't I do this? Even if that's not coming from the caregiver. Yeah. But as kids get older, they're going to be picking up on like, why do I, why when something goes wrong or I get upset or I get frustrated, it's so hard for me to calm myself down. None of my other friends experience that. And then I look like, I look bad in front of my peers and then shame, so it's so important for caregivers to dig in and try to recognize when they're seeing differences in their child's development, to kind of chase that why and figure out, okay, what's going on here? And then work on meeting the child where they are in that moment developmentally and give them what they need. Because what ends up happening is if I look at my 16-year-old son, who happens to be 6'2", and he's in a man-sized body, right? Yeah. And I look at him and I'm like, dude, why can't you do that? Right. Or I look at him and I just say, well, he might need me to engage with him as if he was much younger, but I'm not going to do that because technically he's older and he should be able to do this. Then he's not going to get what he didn't get from me. And he's not going to be able to grow, and it's going to increase the shame, and it's going to just perpetuate the challenge that exists. So I'm kind of going into another kind of question that I think we're going to tackle, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But flexibility as caregivers is really important. And if we find ourselves digging ourselves in with our heels and saying, well, no, they're 12 or they're 5 or they're 17. This shouldn't be an issue. Then I would challenge caregivers to question themselves on that and just take a deep breath and say, well, wait a minute. Let me remind myself about what this child's history is. And then maybe ask myself, is this happening because of a lagging skill or something that my child didn't get that they desperately needed? And I need to go back and give that to them and like open my mind and be flexible about, I may need my 12-year-old to lay in my arms and rock them. And it might be playful and silly, but that may be what they need.
Yeah.
So why not give it to them?
Absolutely. And I think also just in general, when we're saying should be doing this, should be like, that doesn't help anyone. Like that's not what the reality is. And, you know, introducing even more shame and guilt or confusion, like it's not helpful. And I know we just as people, if you have felt that way, like no judgment, that's a normal human reaction. But if we can try to remove the shoulds, I think that could be helpful.
It feels good to remove the should.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's like, we just put so much pressure on ourselves, I think, in like all aspects of life when it's like, I should be doing this. I should be at this point. And it's like, well, it's not what's happening. So just, I know we were talking about this. This isn't necessarily, or not necessarily, it's 100% not specific to adopted kids. But when thinking about adoption, when a family is kind of considering, you know, what age range to be open to, like what is something that you wish that they knew about the difference in developmental and chronological age and how that can impact a child's, you know, attachment and bonding?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a lot of what I've started to talk about of like being flexible and, you know, if we get stuck in this rut of just expecting that the child's going to fit in the box of the chronological age that they are, then we're not going to be able to, or we're not going to naturally go to the place of meeting them where they are developmentally in that moment. And then we miss the opportunity to help them heal and to promote growth because we're too fixated on, no, they're supposed to be in this space right now because they're this age. And then, you know, again, reiterating that being flexible in our expectations, not just around development, but expectations around that bonding piece and attachment piece. Because not only, you know, things that I think a lot of families that have kids come to them either through adoption or foster care or different situations, a lot of them understand, oh, they're not going to just like give me a hug right away, or they're not going to want to like lean into me on the couch, and they're not going to say I love you, or they're not. I mean, a lot of people understand that piece, but I think what sometimes we forget about is that our prior experience in relationship tells us what we know so far about how to engage in relationship. So if that child is coming from a situation where the only way they ever got their needs met was to have really big acting out behaviors, that will likely be the initial approach that child takes to try to build relationship because that's what they know. And that can be really frustrating and hard for caregivers. And so I think having patience and just recognizing that oftentimes kids are responding the way they are in relationships and with attachment and bonding, not because they won't, or, you know, because they're not capable of doing it at some point, but because they don't have the tools. Like they don't know how. And it's not that they don't want to. They desperately want to. We all desperately want to connect. We're human, right? But if we don't have the tools and we don't know how to do it appropriately, then it's going to be really hard to be successful. And add on, you know, so that's why it's so important for the caregiver to be flexible and ask questions and remember child's history and give the child tools and give the child a lot of grace. Because if you can imagine, right, I desperately want to connect with you, but I don't know how to do it. And so I do what I know to do. And then your response is to shut me down or shame me or distance yourself. Then it's like, well, not only do I not know how to do it, and I desperately want to do it, but now you don't want to do that with me, is the message, because I don't do it right. But what I need from you is to teach me how to do it.
Yeah. That's like a kind of heartbreaking to think, like, when you most need the connection and love and you have no idea how to ask for it and to be pushed away. Like that's,
yeah. And I don't think caregivers intend to do that. I think it's kind of like a side effect of like, we do the best we can with what we know and the tools we have. And when we know better, we do better. Right. So, I think the best thing that we can do, again, flexibility, dig into that child's history, think about how it's impacted their development, and then meet their developmental needs at the age they are in that moment, which could be different. Like what they needed in the morning is different from what they needed in the afternoon to be successful, because what happened in between? Well, they went to school and there was a lot of sensory stuff going on and they had to focus and they had to learn and they're exhausted. And so they can't do what they could do this morning. So instead of looking at them and being like, you could do that this morning, what's wrong? Why can't you do that yourself now? Well, because there's stuff that happened in between. And instead just saying, hey, I'm going to help you. And we're going to make this happen and you can do it. And I'm going to come alongside you. Yeah.
No, I love that. Like just flexibility and kind of constantly checking in and recognizing that they're different than they were before. And that's constantly going to be happening. That change is just, it doesn't end. How can families begin to recognize the differences between a child's developmental age and chronological age? Like maybe if they are an adoptive family or foster family and this child has recently come into their home.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of, it's a little bit being a detective. So I would say that just enter that relationship from a place of curiosity from the get-go. Don't enter the relationship from the place of like, I know what you've been, even if you've got like tons of history, like you don't know everything and you don't know yet how have those experiences impacted where they are developmentally, educationally, all of those things. So I would say enter from a place of curiosity. Again, I think, naturally there's going to be questions and things that come up through the course of like medical appointments and things like that to kind of figure out, what's going on developmentally for the child. But then also like just paying attention to, times when you see your child with same age peers, listening, to what they're telling you when they tell you, because kids aren't always going to share, but like if they're coming home and they're frustrated or they're upset, opening the door for conversation and saying, hey, what's going on, buddy? What happened? Why are you upset? But not from a place of judgment, but from a place of help me understand how to help you and support you. Because a lot of times kids will say things that are cues to us about the challenges that they're having. And it's a reflection of like a tool that they don't have or skill that they don't have, or their developmental stage is different from their peers. So we can learn a lot from them. I think when you see, you can also see discrepancies in your child's behaviors or their capacity to cope with stressful situations where they might have what we might call like an over-the-top reaction or an immature reaction. Then I think that's a cue to us as caregivers to say, well, why is that happening? It could be, and likely is, because their capacity for behavioral and emotional self-regulation is not maybe where it could be because they didn't get the support they needed to develop that skill, right? Sometimes, now I'm not saying like it happens once and then, oh, well, therefore you're really 3 emotionally, because I have times when I behave like a 3-year-old, right? But I'm saying like, if this is a pattern, right, and you're seeing it a lot, then that's time when you might say, what's going on here? And you can always reach out to like occupational therapists. That's a really great place to find an OT that can do an evaluation. Here in the US, if your child is between, and it may be different in different states, but if your child is, between 0 and 5 and may go beyond that, you can go to the school district and request a child find evaluation, and they will evaluate your child for developmental stages across all the domains of development. So that can also be really helpful. And the purpose of that is to understand what that child needs to be successful in school, but it's also really helpful to understand what the child needs to be successful in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, just in that, your needs and what you're able to, kind of take on or handle, like changes throughout the day and changes throughout the experiences that you have. So kind of in that same vein, like, I'm guessing the answer is no, but does developmental age remain the same, like in different settings, school, it's, if it's a child maybe adopted internationally in an institution within family, kind of what does that look like?
Sorry. I think generally the developmental stage that they're at, whether it's cognitively, physically, emotionally, socially, or their life experience, that's not necessarily going to shift in different settings, but it may not be recognized or manifested in that particular setting, depending on what the setting is and what's going on and what the expectations are. Our kids can be all over the map, right? In terms of like, with just developmental situations that are very disjointed that I mentioned earlier. They might be 3 emotionally and they might be 8 cognitively. They might, so there's some disjointedness. But what we often find with kids, even kids who really struggle with sensory processing and regulation skills, is that when they go to school, they find ways to just hold it together, right? And then because they don't have they may not feel that they have a safety net. They may not feel that there's somebody there that like, they can just let her rip of like, this is what's really happening inside me, and feel like their needs are going to be met. And especially if they're going, if they're a kiddo that's in like a middle school or high school setting where they have multiple teachers and it's not just the one teacher all day, every day. And then they come home and they let it rip, right? Because they come home and they're with their caregiver and it's like, it's like this big exhale of like, like behavioral exhale of like, man, I just held it together all day and had all the sensory stuff happening and it was so irritating and stressful, but I had to sit still and I had to pay attention. I had to try to learn and I had to do all these things. And I probably wasn't super successful with that because I was so dysregulated, or I was struggling because I didn't have the skills I needed. But I get home and now I can just release it, right? And that's very frustrating for families because they're like, how come they can do just fine all day at school? And then they come home and it blows up. And I hate to say this, but that's a good thing that they can blow up at home, because that means they feel safe enough to show you that like they're struggling. And the challenge of that is getting their lid down, helping them to regulate and calm down, and then exploring what it is that caused them to get to that place of like blowing up. Like, were they holding it in all day? What happened at school? That kind of thing. So it does remain in all settings, but you don't always see it in all settings.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I'm sure that is a frustrating experience, but also like a privilege that someone feels safe enough with you to like let it out, because you can't hold that, you know what I mean? Like you can't hold that in, like it has to come out somewhere. And if they feel safe with you to do that, like, even though that's difficult, that's a good thing. So how can families support a child who may have a developmental age that's different from their chronological age?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the times, if we go back and we think about those 5 B's, right? If you think about brain, body, biology, and beliefs, those are things that aren't obviously visible to us most of the time, right? They're things that are kind of under the surface. But they're often expressed through the behaviors. So this is why it's so important, again, to remind ourselves, what's this child's history? I may be looking at a 6'2", 16-year-old in a man-sized body, but his history in utero and in his early years has impacted his development differently in this moment. And he's showing me through his behavior. So it's really tempted to look at him in that man-sized body and expect him to behave and have skills that are like a grown man. But the reality is that he actually isn't grown, and he has differences in his development based on his history. So giving them what they need in that moment, adjusting our expectations, being flexible. I think one thing that's really helpful for me to think about when I have these struggles in those moments with either of my kids is really remembering typical brain development and just knowing that there's a really key part of our prefrontal cortex in the front of our brains, which is one of the last parts to develop completely. That is responsible, has a big responsibility for helping us to regulate our behaviors and our emotions. And what research tells us, and a lot of this, one of my favorite people in this field is Dr. Daniel Siegel. So I have some, books that I'll recommend later. And but what we know through research is that we don't even have access to that part of our brain until we're about 3 or 4 years old.
Wow!
Because the brain develops from the bottom up, from the back to the front, and from the inside out. And so can't even access it. So this idea about self-soothing and the baby will cry it out, that doesn't exist. They don't have any capacity for that. Actually, what they learn is I should stop crying because nobody's going to come when it's dark. Or nobody's going to come when I'm in my crib, so I'm going to stop crying. But they are not regulated. They have not had their needs met. They don't have the capacity to do that. And that's learning that, the neurobiology field has discovered fairly recently, right? So if anybody's listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I let them cry it out, I don't want you to worry about it, because you do the best you can with what you know, right? And we can always help to heal things from the past. The other piece of that is that assuming that we've had a healthy, consistent, warm, nurturing caregiver going around that attachment cycle in the first 3 years of life and continuing on saying, yes, I'll meet your needs. Yes, you matter. Yes, I'll teach you how to calm down. Yes, I'll support you. Yes, I'll feed you. Yes, 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 yes. Right. You're teaching through that process. You're teaching that child the skills of the tools of how to regulate and how to manage their emotions. And through that relationship that's happening through the years, for that part of our brain to fully develop in a healthy situation where you don't have trauma and you don't have stressful experiences, especially early on. For women, that part of the brain is not fully developed until our late 20s. And for men, it's not until the early 30s. So put that into perspective, okay? So, and that's assuming a healthy situation with no trauma, right? So put that into my brain about my 6'2", 16-year-old son and my 5-foot daughter who's 15. And looking at them and their bodies that, look mature and look adult, and expecting them to be able to behaviorally and emotionally self-regulate in any given moment the way an adult would, it just is wrong. It just doesn't exist. They don't have the full capacity to do that because they're only halfway there. And that's assuming that they didn't have trauma. Now you think about our kids who have had trauma and situations that have impacted their capacity for those things, they're even more delayed. So I think it's just really helpful to remember that, because it's, if we remember that, even just that small piece, even if we forget everything that they've been through in their history as far as trauma and stressful experiences, if we just remember, oh, wait, they're only halfway there, because they're not going to be fully there until their late 20s or early 30s. It helps us reframe what we're seeing in front of us. And I said earlier, I said, sometimes I act like a 3-year-old. The reality is that as humans, we don't ever come to a place in our lives where we no longer need other people to help us calm down. It's just not a thing. So it helps us to give grace to ourselves and to our kids when we see these things happening that are rooted in development or delays or things that skills that they just don't have. It helps us to remember it's not that they won't, it's that maybe right now they can't. And they need help. And we have to be able to offer it. And we all have those moments where it's not that we won't, it's that right now I can't. And what I really need from you is to support me and to help me. So I think that's a key thing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I have to say my mind is kind of exploding right now thinking about that. Explains a lot. That is, wow. Thank you for enlightening me there. So, we've kind of been talking about like the caregivers or the family unit and kind of how to, think, maybe change your mindset about some of these things. Like a thing that can be difficult is, there's not a ton of awareness about this. And how can parents, explain to families and friends and teachers, that their child, might not meet the milestones that they, at the same chronological age as other children?
So for example, at school, right? Not everybody at the school needs to have all the information, right? The front office person doesn't need to know all the details. He or she might need to know a little bit, but not everything, right? But the teacher or the other professionals at the school who maybe are working with your kiddo on a regular basis are going to need to understand a little bit more deeply what your child needs in order to be successful. Now, the reason I say it that way on purpose, I didn't say they need to understand deeply your child's whole history. No. It's what does your child need to be successful in that environment? So, for example, like my son needs certain tools to help him stay regulated because of his sensory system needing some support, right? And so then I might share, well, this is what that might look like. The good news is in the school system, there's mechanisms built in, right, for that, such as, individual education plans, 504 plans, that kind of thing. And through that process, you can help make that information known. If there are things, specific challenges that are connected to their history, and it's important to share that information as to the why, then you can share that. But, if you're sharing information with like a family member, right? Aunt and uncle. That you're going to visit over the summer and you're going to be spending a week with them. Do they need to know that child's entire history? Probably not, but they might need to know, well, you might see some like behaviors or like when she gets upset, it takes her longer to calm down than maybe other kids her age. And that's just because she's still learning the skills to do that. Done. Don't need to say anything else. So I think it's just, that's the biggest thing. What do people need to know about your child and or their history in order for them to be successful with that person or in that situation? It's probably the biggest piece.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. And you don't need to, that is obviously like a really, kids' histories, like that's for them to share and to, kind of confront on their own, like not to have everyone in their life necessarily know about some of that hard stuff.
And it can be simple too. It doesn't have to be, it can just be like, hey, it's hard for my daughter to follow multiple directions at once. She does better if you just give her one instruction at a time, as opposed to giving her 4 instructions at a time.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
And they may say, why is that? I'm like, well, it's just what she needs.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of one of those, like, if they don't need to know it, they don't need to know it.
Absolutely. Can you just share some resources for families that are navigating the challenges that can come with developmental differences?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I mentioned earlier, I think utilizing resources in your community is huge. So, pediatricians and doctors vary in terms of what their level of understanding and expertise is in this area. But I think if a lot of occupational therapists are a great place to start if you suspect that there might be some developmental delays. I would very much recommend that you inquire with that occupational therapist as to whether or not they are well informed or have any expertise around sensory processing or sensory integration. And most of them are, but not all of them are. And that's a really big thing for a lot of our kids. So I would reach out for those resources when it comes to, if you think you want to get an evaluation. Also, Child Find through school districts is a great resource. In terms of just things that are out there on the internet, of course, at AGCI, we have our Families Are Forever training classes, and there's just a lot of really wonderful topics that caregivers and professionals can check out and do some learning. Websites specific to child development, of course, the Karen Purvis Institute for Child Development, the Center on the Developing Child through Harvard University is a really great resource, and the Child Trauma Academy, that's Bruce Perry's work, that has just some really fantastic information. And then there's a Center for Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation through Georgetown University Center for Child and Human Development. And as an easy button, if you just want to go to the Child Welfare Information Gateway and type in child development, it'll give you a list that will include most of these things.
Oh, awesome.
So that's kind of an easy thing. And then, as far as books, I mentioned Daniel Siegel earlier. I think if you're interested in learning about brain development and how trauma impacts the brain, he has 2 really amazing books they don't feel daunting to read. I'm not like, I do read and I do, but I go through phases of wanting to read and not wanting to read. But like one of his books, if you're just starting out, or if it's been a while since you've learned or learned anything about the brain development, I would suggest The Whole Brain Child, by Dr. Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. And that's actually a really lovely book about the brain that's pretty thin. It's only about a quarter-inch thick, and it's got like comic strips and stuff, and it's fun to read, which feels weird because it's about the brain, but it's fun to read. And then the other one that Dr. Daniel Siegel wrote is called Brainstorm: The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain. And I really love that. It was actually written for teenagers to read, as well as their caregivers. And I suggest if you have a teenager, and you could bribe them $20 a chapter or something, like read it together and then talk about it. But it's just really a wonderful way to have a better, deeper understanding about the teenage adolescent years and what's happening in their brains and bodies and how that kind of comes out in their behavior. If you're not a reader, that one is, Dr. Siegel has done a recording on YouTube. It's about 2 hours, and it's him giving a presentation. I know 2 hours sounds long, but it's well worth it. And it's basically the essentials of what he has in that book in a presentation. And you just go into YouTube and put in Dan Siegel Brainstorm, and it will come up. And then I think the books around TBRI, The Connected Child, by Dr. Purvis, Dr. Cross, Wendy Sunshine, as well as The Connected Parent, which is newer. And that was Dr. Purvis and Lisa Qualls. And then the last one is, probably well over 80% of our kids who experience trauma has some form of sensory processing challenge that they face. And that's a really big one that I very strongly encourage parents to learn about that. But one of my favorite books, two, they're kind of together, but is The Out of Sync Child and The Out of Sync Child Grows Up by Carol Stock Kranowitz. And the reason I love those books is because they're very accessible to read. Her background is as a kindergarten teacher, and she just has this beautiful way of explaining things. Doesn't feel like your brain is spinning trying to understand it all. And she does a really great job of offering anecdotal examples of like what this situation would look like for a typical child versus a child that's struggling in that area. So those are really good as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to compile that amazing list. I'm like, I got to check out some of these books and so many different options. So thank you. And it was such a joy to talk with you. And I'm just so appreciative of your time and your wisdom. So thank you, Jill. Thanks for listening to Together by AGCI. As always, if you liked what you heard, please rate or review us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to read or watch even more stories, check out our website, allgodschildren.org. Reach out to us and let us know what you think on Instagram at All God's Children International, or email us at together@allgodschildren.org. We look forward to sharing another story of hope the next time we're together. We'll talk to you soon.